Jeff is the general manager of Norwich Public Utilities, and as I mentioned earlier, they have major responsibilities, and it's recognized. The Norwich Public Utilities is recognized as the premier organization in Eastern Connecticut, in the state, actually. So, Jeff, congratulations, and why don't you say a few words?
Absolutely. Great, thank you, Tony. And it's funny, I was going to come up here and complain about recovering from a cold and hoping I didn't cough my way through this, but the congressman has definitely beat me with a root canal, so I'll just stop talking on that. Thank you for the recognition. I am the new old guy, so I've been with Norwich Public Utilities for 21 years, working in every area of the business. Just recently, January 1st, promoted to general manager, and it is a wonderful privilege that I take very seriously. It's also a huge responsibility, as those of you in similar roles or near similar roles understand. But I look forward to being a student of our organization, our community, and our customers as I go forward. I want to thank Tony and Megan again for putting together a great event, and also the entire Eastern Chamber staff. You guys knock it out of the park every single time, and I can't acknowledge that enough. It's so great to see a lot of old friends out here today. So as I become general manager, one of the things that I want to do is capitalize on the momentum that we have as an organization. And there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes to literally keep the lights on, keep the gas flowing, the water, the wastewater, et cetera. I don't think in the history of our organization, matter of fact, I know in the history of our organization, we've never had so many important initiatives and projects. In the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to do $500 million worth of capital work. The interesting thing is that the time to maintain reliability 3, 5, and 10 years from now is right now, and by making investments now. And those of you that run businesses all understand that you have to continue to reinvest. You have to continue to be proactive in order to maintain the highest level of reliability, customer service, and competitiveness. And that's what we strive for at Norwich Public Utilities. A few highlights. In the second year of construction, we were able to get a grant, $20.9 million, with great help from the congressman to replace. All right, when I say this was transformational for the gas division of Norwich Public Utilities, that is not an understatement. We are replacing all of our cast iron mains. Those, for you may not be familiar, are the most problematic when it comes to leaks and things like that. So not only is this a reliability benefit, this is also an environmental benefit because you're not having the methane escape and things like that. So this is something that, again, is critical to our community. So again, I want to thank you for that. We have continual progress, ongoing progress on several major water projects on our distribution system and our 2 treatment plants. We're 60% complete. That happened quick. 60% complete on our $200 million wastewater plant upgrade. We've been talking about this since I started 21 years ago, and it's happening. So that's going to have a huge impact on the harbor in Norwich, Long Island Sound, and just really appreciate the partnership with our friends at DEEP to make that happen. One of the areas that you haven't heard us talk a lot about is the electric system, but it's one of the most critical systems that we have, and we are recently passed a $150 million bond to fund necessary critical infrastructure upgrades in the electric system. One of the first projects for that is going out to bid probably next week, and that is to run new electric up of the Laurel Hill area of Norwich. That's some of the most problematic or most frequent outages that we have. It's not frequent, but it's more frequent than other areas. And it also enables us to support it whatever ultimately happens at the state hospital as well. Along with all of this, we do contribute back to the city 10% of our gross revenues. So that's a little less than $10 million a year, or $96 million over the last 10 years. So that's where we can, again, give back to the community. I see the mayor applauding. So, but not only that, but I appreciate the partnership. We talk a couple times a week, right, Singh? And that's invaluable to be able to work together and create those efficiencies. We're the first in state to develop a community assistance rate. And what this is to help those who are less fortunate from an income point of view, afford their utilities. We've saved the community almost $750,000 with that rate and continue to move forward. So again, we work very closely with people to help those who are making the effort to help themselves. So anyway, enough about us and enough about me. I want to talk about Congressman Courtney. And the Congressman has been a steward public official for MPU, Norwich, Eastern Connecticut, and our country throughout his tenure in Congress. I don't even need to tell you, everybody knows that. His hard work, integrity, intellect, and commitment to public service has made a remarkable impact on our part of the world. And in these uncertain and challenging times, I don't think I need to tell anybody that, we are fortunate to be able to count on his leadership, tenacity, and experience in the weeks ahead. So at this point, it is my pleasure to introduce our Congressman, Joe Courtney.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to begin by, first of all, thanking my dentist this morning, who squeezed me in at 8 o'clock this morning. I mean, I was in tough shape. I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about. So, he somehow measured the Novocaine to wear off in perfect timing, so I'm not drooling up here talking to you here today. So, thank you, Jeff, for the kind introduction. And NPU. Again, it's really just been a great pillar to work with over the years, and Chris, Riley, and the whole team. And it is true, when the infrastructure bill passed, I think they were sleeping outside our door at the office to really get in and make sure that the opportunities that the bill presented, and again, this goes back to 2021, and as I think many of you know, but they certainly know, that a lot of those grants are competitive grants, and you've really got to be on your toes in terms of just getting in there fast and smart in terms of the applications. And again, they've been just amazing. And again, I think the proof is with the projects that Jeff described. And by the way, it's 2026. It's 5 years since the infrastructure bill passed, and one sign of intelligent life in Washington. I see friends here from the Construction Trade Association is that there is a bipartisan effort to work on trying to get a bill done this year, which will hopefully build on what was a really, I think, great achievement in 2021. The prior infrastructure bills were really just placeholders and really didn't move the ball much, but that one did. And again, hopefully, we're gonna see some movement as the year progresses. In addition to those guys sleeping on the doorstep, I mean, we now have a new mayor in Norwich who is also someone who is not bashful about reaching out to the office, and I want to again publicly congratulate him on his great success, taking office. And I think we're going to see each other in Washington in a few days. And again, we've already had a couple sort of ribbon cuttings with the new wharf federal funds to help build out, what again has just been this, gem that we've never really seen, utilized to its highest and best use. So I think that's going to change, really in the near future. And Mayor Passero is another one who, again, is no wallflower when it comes to, again, pushing the delegation to move along. Again, yesterday we had a great visit with a new federal grant for early childhood education, which, again, the school district and all of the other advocates were there, and they've in 5 years just created this incredibly successful program that hopefully these funds are going to enlarge and build out. So again, there's so many people here looking around the room that we've worked with in the office for many years. I know some of the folks from the recovery community are here that we were able to get some help over the years. And just want to say hi and congratulate you guys for still hanging in there. Again, this part of Connecticut, was actually in a pretty tough place, about 4 or 5 years ago in terms of overdoses and deaths from overdoses. And again, there really has been an impressive, you don't want to get too giddy about it, but there's definitely been progress made, and that didn't happen by itself. It's because we really had some great people out there working with the Norwich Police Department, New London Police Department, to really, turn and change, that harsh reality. So, I definitely am not going to filibuster here. I know people want to ask a few questions, but I'm going to try and run through quickly, some topics, and then stop. clearly the dominant issue of the day, is clearly the war in Iran. And I thought, I'd sort of give you a little bit of a snapshot again as someone on the Armed Services Committee. The week before this one, we actually had about 6 hours of briefings, unfortunately all classified, which has been, in my opinion, a really negative, sort of approach that the administration has taken, that there's just been no transparency about a whole host of issues that are going on here. And again, I want to, start by recognizing Lauren and the great work that you're doing from military families. I mean, they are military. In terms of the American, sort of as a nation, I mean, we've got a lot of people over there, and they are on the front lines. We lost 4 last night in a KC-135 tanker event. We still haven't gotten the details yet on that, but 7 others have lost their lives. The week before the war started on February 28th, February 21st, we actually had a send-off ceremony at Hartford Armory for the Connecticut Army National Guard, the 143rd Tactical Unit. There was about 85 that were, again, heading out to Kuwait. Again, this is a unit that does tactical and logistical support over there, and that was exactly the work that those 6 service members who were killed in Kuwait from Iowa were doing, who are also guards and reservists. And I've been over there a few times, and it's always striking to me just how the citizen soldiers, the Guard and Reserve, are so they're so omnipresent over there. They do so much of the work that's happening there. I mean, the Groton TASM-G unit that does the helicopter repairs, they were over there on one of my visits. By the way, we're just universally praised by every other sort of active duty and reserve unit that was over there in terms of just the amazing work that they do. But their position right now in terms of being in Kuwait, I'm just always reminded of the fact that talking to the families at that send-off, when there was a lot of first-timers going over there, very young, very nervous, and you're trying to be supportive and reassuring, and we knew certainly there was a concentration of forces that was building up over at the Middle East there, but the way things unfolded starting on February 28th, where a strike was announced, in an 8-minute video that was taped down in Mar-a-Lago with no consultation with Congress of any sort. And I'm talking, even the leadership, let alone the full Congress. And what's happened since, as I said, in terms of trying to get questions answered and get some visibility into, what was the basis of the decision, number one? What was the imminent threat that triggered this action? And number two, what's the end game in terms of what we're trying to achieve? One of the hearings that I had when I was first in Congress, General David Petraeus, the 4-star Army general, came over and testified. He was the one who they brought into Central Command, which is that Middle East area, and really sort of stabilized the situation there. But he made, many of you probably have heard of this, but his comment is that before this country makes a decision to invade or strike, you've got to ask the question, tell me, how does this end? I mean, you need to be able to answer that question if you really know why you're going in and what is the end goal here. And when you sort of take that question and apply it to where we are right now, I mean, frankly, there just has not been very good answers to that question. It's certainly in my opinion. And the video that was released had a whole variety of explanations in terms of whether it was regime change, whether it was to eliminate missile threat, the nuclear threat, now unconditional surrender. These things, it just keeps sort of the target keeps sort of moving around, and as I said, the committees, the defense committees, armed services, and the defense appropriations committees, have had some briefings, and again, as I said, we had one with Rubio and Hegseth and Ratcliffe from the CIA and General Kane. But it's always behind closed doors. And this week when the Senate was in, if any of you were sort of following some of the news, Chris and Senator Blumenthal came out of the meetings there, and again, kind of shook up and frustrated, but about the fact that they can't sort of really talk about that much, because when you go into these classified briefings, everything is classified. And so, but we do know a few things. Okay, so the first sort of tally in terms of costs that have been incurred now have been sort of publicly reported. It's about $11 billion through March 10th. So that's a burn rate of about $1 billion a day, actually a little bit more. We know that critical munitions, which are being fired at, different sites, but also defense missiles, Patriot interceptors, we're burning through them at an incredibly fast pace. And in fact, they're already now starting to move some munitions from South Korea to the Middle East, which, again, that's really robbing Peter to pay Paul, to say the least, in terms of just, an area that, we obviously have an ally that, depends on us. And also, there's a lot going on over there as well. As I said, we now know certainly the casualty count is certainly been reported, but also now wounded numbers are starting to come out, which again is another sort of layer of sacrifice, and cost that is happening in real time. And so the week before last, there were 2 votes to try and force a more, in my opinion, legal, constitutional, accountable, transparent process using the War Powers Resolution, which again is a law that basically says that a president has to come to Congress either for a declaration of war, authorization of military use of force, or the military action stops. This was passed during the Nixon era. Again, it's had mixed results in terms of how it's been used. But when you think about it, I mean, critics of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, one thing you can certainly give Bush credit for is he came to Congress before he started, those military strikes and intervention. And again, that just has not happened at all in terms of where we are right now. And the latest sort of explanation that we got from the president was in one of his, I don't know if it was one of his plane interviews or whatever, but he pointed out, I'm sorry, this is Truth Social, the night before last. The United States is the largest oil producer in the world by far. So when oil prices go up, we make a lot of money. And it's like, who's we? Number one, okay? I don't think it's any of us in this room, okay? And secondly, it's just, that is not that's not America. We don't go to war to enrich ourselves. We go to war to protect the nation or to protect our allies after full consultation as required by the Constitution in terms of where we make that decision. Unfortunately, those votes came up short. We missed by 4 votes. The speaker, just totally refused, in my opinion, to sort of stand up, not just for a position or a policy position, but the Constitution in terms of what a co-equal branch of government's Article 1, Section 8 authorities, Clause 13, which is Congress shall declare war. Obviously, there's going to continue to be, I think, a lot of pressure from folks like myself and others to force this issue, number one, into the public view, which is what I think the country deserves. Because if we're burning money at $1 billion a day, there's no question that the administration's coming to the American people to pay for it with a supplemental budget request, and it's not going to be a small number. And so when we look around the room here and look at all the priorities of people who are doing great work in the community, there's trade-offs here, and that involves everybody in terms of where we want to go as a country. So I'll stop there on that point. And again, I'm certainly happy to take any other questions. A couple other points that I did want to sort of talk about, and then I'll stop, is number one, The offshore wind project, Revolution Wind, which faced 2 halt work orders, which 2 times the federal courts ruled against the president and the administration. We have weekly update calls with Ørsted in our office, and we are very close to that project being complete. It's roughly about 93% in terms of the last number that we heard. And one thing that I think is really important, because there's been so much misinformation around this project, is that the contract that was signed for Revolution Wind was for 9 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, so take that number, put it there, and then the average cost regionally for kilowatts for our energy system is 30 cents an hour. So, there's a lot of people who have criticized this project that it was too expensive and it's not, good for, our electricity issue here. I mean, the fact of the matter is 9 cents a kilowatt hour is a much better deal than 30 cents a kilowatt hour. And by the way, it's not going to be subject to a war in the Middle East. I mean, we actually can control that energy supply, which is just off our own coast. We had some interesting sort of back and forth in Washington on this issue, because down in Virginia, they had an offshore wind project by Dominion Power Company, which all the Republican members who I work with on the Armed Services Committee were just as active in terms of fighting the administration's halt work order. And that case was also successful. And they are just about in the same place in terms of completion. We had a briefing from the Department of Defense to deal with the national security threat that supposedly offshore wind poses. And there was nothing in there that was new. I mean, Paul Weisgarber knows, there's clutter that's caused by wind turbines, but there's ways to mitigate that. And in fact, that's exactly what happened with both projects in Ørsted. And that's why the courts rejected the national security issue that came up. And lastly, on tariffs, which a couple of days ago, we had a tariff tour up in the Quiet Corner where we visited a bunch of businesses who talked about the impact of tariffs on their business. It was a small electrical company that talked about how they lost business because home remodeling, kind of work that they did, purchases of equipment, parts, everything just went up and all their quotes went up, and people sort of stepped back from even contracts that had been signed. And, this is a small family-owned business that was up there. We went to a chocolate shop where they import their chocolate from Switzerland, 44% tariff coming in from there. And they're trying to keep a price point up in Danielson where people can actually come in and afford to buy chocolate, and a coffee shop who, again, whether it was the price of Brazilian coffee, which for at least a pretty good chunk of time was subject to a tariff, but also all of their paper products, all of their equipment in terms of grinding, coffee grinding machines, went from $2,400 to $4,600, post Liberation Day. That's there. So again, good news, the Supreme Court did a really pretty amazing thing by a 6-3 decision, struck down the emergency tariffs. And the Court of International Trade, which is the lower court on tariff cases, has already ordered the Treasury Department to give people their money back. I was talking to a business who paid a tariff that got sort of hit blindsided. And, these arguments that they're making now in the Treasury Department, oh, it's too complicated. This is going to be really hard. It's going to take really long time. His comment was, they did a pretty good job of collecting my money. He goes, I think they can do a good job of giving me my money back. Okay, but again, this issue is still not over. They're trying to use different sort of authorities. And again, this is another case of where it is, as the court pointed out in the decision, this is a power for Congress. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to impose taxes, not the executive branch. And a tariff is a tax. It's a tax on imports, period, full stop. That's why, again, at every level of that case, the government's position was just totally blown out of the water. That's there. So, I was actually quite impressed when I was up in Danielson, the fact that businesses were really actually at the point where they've had enough and they wanted to go out and talk about this publicly. And we actually had the local chamber L. Jordan, who some of you may know up there, who accompanied us on there. But the business community can really make a difference, in terms of that issue, because I know for a fact my Republican colleagues hate this issue. They first of all, as a party, that was never sort of their platform in terms of tariffs. And secondly, their constituents, particularly in agricultural parts of the country, where the tariffs have started trade wars that have really just hammered their exports to other parts of the world. The pain is even more acute in that area there. So again, something to think about. After today is just we're all ears, and I can tell you other cases of pretty egregious examples where companies got sort of blindsided, as I said, by Liberation Day tariffs. And even though we won the Supreme Court case, as I said, they're going to keep coming with different authorities. And that's not how we're going to grow as a country. Connecticut, by the way, is an export state, net export state. Our number one trading partner is Canada, which, it kind of makes you embarrassed, at times to just sort of think about, the abuse and mistreatment. I was thinking about, some of you may have been Whalers fans back in the days when Gordie Hull actually played for the Whalers, and they actually retired his number in the rafters up there. And it's like, when did we get mad at Canada? That's what I want to know. So anyway, thank you for a chance to come in and say hello. And again, I'm happy to take a few questions.
A little bit about the SAFE Act, how it will impact us in Connecticut, but also others in the nation?
Sure. So this, as you may have seen, if you watched the State of the Union, I was there, sat through it, and that topic came up and generated quite a reaction in the room that's there. But this measure is already passed in the House and it's in the Senate right now, and it is a major rewrite of election law and voting law for our country. And what it does is creates new sort of requirements for people when they're registering to vote and when they show up to vote. The registration requirement that the law puts in is that you have to show proof of citizenship when you register to vote. Today, when you register to vote, Swarnjeet may know this, or other people running for office, but the registration form, there's actually a box there where you have to sign under the penalties of perjury that you are a U.S. citizen. I mean, the law is well established that non-citizens cannot vote. It's actually a federal crime for people to do that. And again, when you think about it, the notion that someone who's an illegal immigrant would expose themselves to a criminal prosecution, with their own signature, I mean, it's ludicrous, and that's why all the analysis shows that it's even Heritage Foundation and Cato Institute, which are certainly far right of center, that the instances of illegal citizens voting is almost, non-existent. That's there. But having said that, I just want to make sure people know that the existing law already requires that you declare that you're not a citizen. And that has been very successful by itself in terms of deterring people who might, think they can somehow game the system and get in there and vote. What the law does, what the SAVE Act does, is that it basically says you have to show, as I said, proof of citizenship, which would be a passport. 50% of Americans don't have passports. They're not that cheap, as some of you may know. And a lot of people just don't need them because they're at a point in life where they're not traveling. But anyway, so proof or a birth certificate. And again, for spouses who've taken the name of their spouse, walking in with my wife's maiden name is Budars. If she walked into the Vernon Town Hall with her birth certificate, Audrey Budars, and she wants to register to vote as what her name is now, Audrey Courtney, she would not be able to satisfy that law. It would you'd have to go back and get, the gymnastics in terms of trying to satisfy this, which again, is just completely unnecessary, is just, we know is going to end up, people are going to be disenfranchised. That's there. And then again, the same thing with voting is that, if you show up with a real ID driver's license, which most of us have right now, that actually is not recognized in the statute. They want, and then there's an enhanced real ID. Believe it or not, there's 6 states along the northern border that have an extra layer when you get your driver's license. And that's the only one that the statute or the bill recognizes. So for most of us, you wouldn't be able to even, sort of satisfy that piece of the law. But the last one that is, in my opinion, and this was added to the House bill because it was the second time through, is that within 60 days of enactment, all voter files from every state, 178 million Americans, is mandated to be transferred to the Department of Homeland Security for them to do their own citizenship review. And there is a computer system at DHS which supposedly can, check people's citizenship, but we already know from other sort of instances and activities is that computer is not accurate. And what will happen is people will be purged from the voting rolls after they're sort of scrubbed through that system. And when you think about just, the potential for confusion in terms of people with the same names, and, first of all, so again, it is federalizing our election system, which is what the president has said he thinks is a good idea. If you read the Constitution, it says really clearly, states shall set the date and time and manner of elections. I mean, the Constitution is very clear. This is a state function. There have been a couple of instances where there's been carve-outs after the Civil War in terms of making sure people's civil rights are protected in terms of voting. But again, in terms of the operation, the actual mechanics of voting, it is a state function. It's not a federal function. So this bill, again, it's completely outside of the scope of what the Constitution states. And secondly, it will create havoc for local registrars of voters, who are the real heroes out there. I mean, talk about a brutal, thankless job at times. If you make a mistake, that's a federal crime under this new law. So you're basically going to drive people out of being, who want to step up and do their civic duty and help with our democracy in terms of running elections. So it's a really bad bill, I guess is what I'm saying. And there's a lot of pressure that's being put on the Senate to waive the filibuster rule. If the filibuster rule holds, it's not going to pass. But and it looks like Cornyn may flip on that, which is pretty disappointing. And so, because as I said, the president said he will not sign any other bills until they pass the SAVE Act. I mean, he said that the other day. So it's something to keep an eye on. Again, and they call it a photo ID bill. Everybody in this room knows when you vote in Connecticut, you got to show your identification. You can't go in and just vote. You got to show your ID. So, I think clearly you're going to see a much more, I think, normal, to your point, but also firm adherence to accountability in terms of the executive branch to the American people and to Congress. I mean, right now, so my other committee, Education and Workforce, we have jurisdiction over parts of the Department of Health and Human Services. Every year, the secretary comes over with their budget to talk about what their policies are. RFK has never stepped foot in our committee room, and we got lots of questions for him. And that's been the case over and over and over again. I mean, Armed Services, Hegseth has been there once to the House Armed Services Committee. As I said, they basically just try and use classified briefings as a way of avoiding the public spotlight. And then when we have a classified briefing, there's a hard stop, maybe after like an hour and 15 minutes, where they just basically get up and walk off either the committee table or the committee room. So, you're going to see a lot more accountability. The Government Oversight Committee in the House, in terms of the Epstein files, as far as making sure that the administration, DOJ, obeys the law in terms of, really, PM Bondi apparently the other day just said, we're done. We're not going to we're not going to release any more files. And there's like millions more that still need to come out. So that in terms of, where I think, the dynamic that exists right now, which is really unhealthy, is going to change. And in terms of the priorities of the Congress, we actually did pretty good with the budget that got passed in January. We restored about $170 billion in non-defense domestic spending that the administration tried to cut. We're talking, education, health and human services, environmental programs, and so that was pretty good. But I think there's going to be, that was really just a pure survival defensive action, and I think you're going to see a much more sort of activist sort of lean in terms of certainly the House as far as the way the budget process is concerned. By the way, I did not mention the shutdown of Homeland Security, which I should at least mention that as well, because obviously we've got a pretty big stakeholder in terms of the Coast Guard Academy that's here. So just so you know, there is a bill which Rosa DeLauro, who's the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, introduced really right after we passed the big omnibus bill that would fully fund Coast Guard, FEMA, TSA, Secret Service, all of the non-ICE agencies within the Department of Homeland Security. And I'm a co-sponsor of that. We could, like tonight, sort of fix basically over 90% of DHS's budget if we pass Rosa's bill. And so, and we should, because there's no reason why these other components of the Department of Homeland Security should be sort of caught in this crossfire in terms of the ICE issue that's there. In the meantime, I mean, there is negotiations, or at least on paper, there's negotiations in terms of the ICE funding, which again, the Democratic side has laid out changes that they want to see, which in my opinion are pretty common sense, like the fact that they don't have the right to go into people's houses without a judicial warrant. These administrative warrants are, which the agency just says you can go into anybody's house, is just complete, constitutional trash. I mean, there's just no validity to it. Obviously, the masks, the lack of access into detention centers, and the fact that they actually have to follow court orders. There's been over 4,000 court orders, according to Reuters, that did an inventory of ICE cases where the courts ruled against ICE, and they have not complied in terms of federal district court judges that have ordered that. And lastly, on electric boat, because I kind of skipped by that one, which is a pretty big one. Again, the bill that we passed, which did get clear. Again, the reason why there's 8,000 hires coming is that, again, the funding of the shipbuilding program was very strong in terms of what came through there. I'm very bullish that all the work that's been done, particularly in this region, with career and technical high schools, with the comprehensive high schools now, like Norwich Free Academy, that started a manufacturing program, and I know New London area, it's the same thing, that they're going to hit that goal. I really believe that. And the adult training programs with the Workforce Board, also, they hit their 5,000th graduate about a month or so ago. I mean, incredibly successful program that's there. They're moving north now up to Willimantic, and also even further, they opened up basically the same program that they run down at Grasso Tech up at Quinebaug Valley Community College. So they're moving north and west. And Cheney Tech in Manchester, up kind of where I live, they're already now talking to EB about opening up a program there. So, people have figured it out. The labor contract that was signed last year between the metal trades and the design workforce, I mean, these are a kid coming out of trade school at 18 years old can start at $26 an hour plus benefits. And again, the steps up from that point happen really fast in terms that's there. So that's bringing people in. And again, the folks over at EB, have done a really good job, particularly that outreach to high schools and even younger.
So listen, obviously, give another round of applause to our congressman. There's a lot going on in the region. We're very fortunate. We're well represented in Washington. And we have some great stuff happening with all of the work that the men and women at Electric Boat do, and all of their supply chains. And quite frankly, we're lucky, we're fortunate. And so for that, we should all be very, very thankful. Look, thank you all for being here. And this is certainly a very informative. Congressman, thank you very much. It's great to hear what's going on down there. I think it's down there. Yeah, down there. So listen, folks, have a great day, and thank you again for being here.